Now you've isolated 20 patterns that seem to be true for evolution wherever it occurs, from matter to life to mind. Perhaps we can consider a few of these. Tenet number 1 is that reality is composed of whole parts.
Yes, Arthur Koestler coined the term holon to refer to an entity that is itself a whole and simultaneously a part of some other whole. And if you start to look closely at the things and processes that actually exist, it soon becomes obvious that they are not merely wholes, they're also parts of something else. They are whole parts. They're holons. For instance, a whole atom is part of a whole molecule, and the whole molecule is part of a whole cell, and the whole cell is part of a whole organism, and so on. Each of these entities is neither a whole nor a part, but a whole part, a holon. And the point is, everything is basically a holon of some sort or another. There is a 2,000-year-old philosophical squabble between atomists and holists. Which is ultimately real, the whole or the part? And the answer is neither, or both, if you prefer. There are only whole parts. Even the whole of the cosmos is simply a part of the next moment's whole, indefinitely. At no point do we have the whole, because there is no whole. There are only whole parts forever. So the first tenet says that reality is composed neither of things nor processes, neither wholes nor parts, but whole parts, or holons.
So reality is composed of holons, not just subatomic particles.
Oh, I know that approach is common, but it's really a profoundly reductionistic approach, because it's going to privilege the material, physical universe, and then everything else, from life to mind to spirit, has to be derived from subatomic particles, and this will never, never work. But notice, a subatomic particle is itself a holon, and so is a cell, and so is a symbol, and an image, and a concept. What all of those entities are, before they are anything else, is a holon. So the world is not composed of atoms, or symbols, or cells, or concepts. It's composed of holons. And since the cosmos is composed of holons, then if we look at what all holons have in common, then we can begin to see what evolution in all the various domains has in common, how they all unfold, the common patterns they all display.
So what all holons have in common, that's how you arrive at the 5 tenets?
That's right.
So tenet number 1 is that the cosmos is composed of holons, and tenet 2 is that all holons share certain characteristics.
Right. Because every holon is a whole part. It has 2 tendencies, or 2 drives, we might say. It has to maintain both its wholeness and its partness. On the one hand, it has to maintain its own wholeness, its own identity, its own autonomy, its own agency. If it fails to maintain and preserve its own agency or its own identity, then it simply ceases to exist. So one of the characteristics of a holon in any domain is its agency, its capacity to maintain its own wholeness in the face of environmental pressures which would otherwise obliterate it. This is true for atoms, cells, organisms, ideas. But a holon is not only a whole that has to preserve its agency, it's also a part of some other system, some other wholeness. And so in addition to having to maintain its own autonomy as a whole, it simultaneously has to fit in as a part of something else. Its own existence depends upon its capacity to fit into its environment, and this is true from atoms to molecules to animals to humans. So every holon has not only its own agency as a whole, it also has to fit with its communions as part of other wholes. If it fails at either, if it fails at agency or communion, it's simply erased. It ceases to be.
And that's part of tenet number 2, that each holon possesses both agency and communion. Now you call these the horizontal capacities of holons. What about the vertical capacities of holons, which you call self-transcendence and self-dissolution?
Well, if a holon fails to maintain its agency and its communions, then it can break down completely. When it does break down, it decomposes into its sub-holons. Cells decompose into molecules, which break down into atoms, which can be smashed infinitely under intense pressure. The fascinating thing about Holon decomposition is that Holons tend to dissolve in the reverse direction that they were built up. And this decomposition is self-dissolution, or simply decomposing into sub-Holons, which themselves can decompose into their sub-Holons and so on.
So we have agency and communion operating horizontally on any level, and then vertically we have the move to a higher level altogether, which is self-transcendence, and the move to a lower level, which is self-dissolution.
That's right. Because all Holons are whole parts, they're subjected to various pulls in their own existence. The pull to be a whole, the pull to be a part, the pull up, the pull down. Agency, communion, transcendence, dissolution. All Holons have these four pulls.
So what you're saying is there is indeed some sort of unity to evolution.
Well, it certainly seems so. The continuous process of self-transcendence produces discontinuities, leaps, creative jumps. So there are both discontinuities in evolution. Mind cannot be reduced to life, and life cannot be reduced to matter. And there are continuities, the common patterns that evolution takes in all these domains. And in that sense, yes, the cosmos hangs together, unified by a single process. It is a universe, one song.
And that one song you call Spirit in Action, or God in the Making, which is a point I want to come back to later, but for now, tenet number 3 states simply, Holons emerge.
Yes. As we were saying, evolution isn't part of a self-transcending process. It always goes beyond what went before. And in that novelty, in that emergence, in that creativity, new entities come into being, new patterns unfold, new Holons issue forth. This extraordinary process builds unions out of fragments and wholes out of heaps. The cosmos, it seems, unfolds in quantum leaps of creative emergence.
Which is why one level can't be reduced to its lower components, or why a holon can't be reduced to its sub-holons.
Right. I mean, you can analyze the whole into its constituent parts, and that's a completely valid endeavor, but then you have parts, not the whole. You can take a watch apart and analyze its parts, but they won't tell you the time of day. It's the same with any holon. The wholeness of the holon is not found in any of its parts, and that puts an end to a certain reductionistic frenzy that has plagued Western science virtually from its inception. Particularly with the system sciences, the vivid realization has dawned. We live in a universe of creative emergence.
It seems the tide has indeed turned, that the reductionists no longer have a monopoly on our view of the world. I mean, you hardly have to explain anymore why reductionism in and by itself is bad, and non-reductionism means, in some sense, that the cosmos is creative.
Amazing, isn't it? New holons creatively emerge. Creativity, holons, those are some of the most basic categories that we need to think of before we can think about anything else at all. So yes, that's tenet 3. Holons emerge. And each holon has these 4 basic capacities: agency, communion, self-dissolution, self-transcendence. And so, off we go, creating a cosmos.
Can you say more about how you link creativity and spirit?
Well, what is creativity but another name for spirit? If, as Whitehead said, creativity is an ultimate, you have to have it before you can have anything else, what is an ultimate metaphysical ground if not spirit? For spirit, I also use the Buddhist term emptiness, which we can talk about. But spirit or emptiness gives rise to form. New forms emerge, new holons emerge, and it's not out of thin air. We already saw that many scientists agree that self-transcendence or novel emergence is built into the very fabric of the universe. By any other name, what is that self-transcending creativity? Spirit, yes? We're obviously talking in very general terms here, but so far it appears that we have spirit, creativity, holons.